Walter Grant, a humble, elderly man living a quiet life, stunned everyone with an extraordinary act of kindness that changed lives forever. When he encountered a dying young woman and her desperate husband, he gave away his entire life savings to fund her life-saving surgery, never expecting anything in return. But what began as a selfless sacrifice soon revealed a shocking truth. This woman wasn't a stranger at all, but someone deeply connected to Walter's past. In a twist no one could foresee, Walter discovered a heartbreaking yet heartwarming link that brought him closer to a family he never knew he had. His final act of compassion became the ultimate testament to the power of love and selflessness. The small diner at the corner of Main Street was a quiet place most days, especially in the early afternoon when the lunch crowd had cleared out. It was here that Walter Grant, an elderly man in his late 70s, sat every day, sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper. He wasn't there for the coffee. It was lukewarm at best, or the headlines, which he rarely remembered. For Walter, the diner offered a small respite from the loneliness that had engulfed his life since his wife passed away 2 years prior. Walter's life was simple. He lived in a modest house, paid his bills on time, and had a small savings account that he and his late wife, Margaret, had built over decades of hard work. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him comfortable in his twilight years. One chilly December afternoon, Walter was seated in his usual booth by the window when he noticed a commotion outside. A young woman, no older than 30, was being carried into the diner by a frantic man. She looked pale, her breath shallow, and her eyes barely open. The man, whom Walter assumed was her husband, called out for help, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, someone call an ambulance. She's sick, and I don't know what to do." The diner's staff scrambled, dialing emergency services and offering the man water and napkins. Walter, though not a doctor, approached the man with concern. "What happened to her?" he asked gently. "She has a heart condition," the man explained, his eyes glistening with tears. "She's been on the transplant list for months, but we couldn't afford her medications." And now his voice trailed off, the weight of the situation too much to bear. Walter watched as the young woman struggled for breath, her face contorted in pain. Something about her struck a chord deep within him. Perhaps it was her vulnerability, or the raw emotion in her husband's pleas. He couldn't explain it, but he felt an overwhelming urge to help. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed the woman and loaded her onto a stretcher. Her husband followed, clutching her hand as though letting go would mean losing her forever. As they left, Walter stood frozen in place, a heavy silence settling over the diner. That night, Walter couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the scene over and over: the woman's pale face, her husband's trembling hands, and the palpable despair in the air. He thought of Margaret and how she had always believed in helping others, no matter the cost. "If you have the means to make someone's life better, Walter," she used to say, "then it's your duty to do so." The next morning, Walter found himself at the hospital. He didn't know why he was there or what he planned to do, but he felt drawn to the young woman's plight. After some inquiry, he learned her name was Emily Carter, and her condition was critical. Without a heart transplant, the doctors estimated she had only weeks, perhaps days, to live. Walter asked to speak with her husband, Mark. When Mark arrived in the waiting room, his eyes were red and swollen, a testament to sleepless nights and endless worry. Walter introduced himself and explained that he had been at the diner the previous day. "I don't mean to intrude," Walter said, "but I couldn't stop thinking about your wife. Is there anything I can do to help?" Mark hesitated, his pride and desperation waging an internal battle. Finally, he sighed. "Unless you can pay for the surgery or find her a new heart, I don't think there's much anyone can do. We've sold everything we could, but it's nowhere near enough." Walter's heart ached at the hopelessness in Mark's voice. He had never faced a decision like this before, but as he looked at the young man before him, he felt a sense of clarity. Without a word, Walter stood and walked out of the hospital, leaving Mark puzzled. Over the next few days, Walter visited his bank, consulted with a lawyer, and arranged for his modest estate to be liquidated. He withdrew every penny from his savings account, sold his car, and even parted with a few sentimental items he had kept since Margaret's passing. When Walter returned to the hospital, he handed Mark an envelope filled with everything he had. "This should cover the surgery and then some," he said. Mark stared at the envelope, his hands trembling. I can't accept this," he stammered. "This is your life savings." Walter placed a reassuring hand on Mark's shoulder. "You need it more than I do," he said simply. "I've had my time. If this can give your wife a chance to live, then it's worth it." The surgery was scheduled within days. Emily received her transplant, and though the recovery was long and arduous, she slowly regained her strength. Mark and Emily tried to thank Walter repeatedly, but he always brushed it off, saying their happiness was thanks enough. Months later, Walter received an invitation to dinner at Mark and Emily's home. He hesitated at first, unused to such invitations, but eventually accepted. When he arrived, he was greeted warmly and ushered into a cozy living room filled with photos and the smell of home-cooked food. After dinner, Emily pulled Walter aside. "I've been meaning to ask," she said, her voice soft. "Why did you help us? You didn't even know us." Walter smiled wistfully. "You reminded me of someone," he said. "My wife, Margaret. She always believed in helping others, and I guess I just wanted to honor her memory." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Well, you saved my life. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." "You don't need to," Walter replied. "Just live your life fully and cherish the time you have." As the evening wore on, Mark brought out an old photo album, hoping to share stories of their family with Walter. As they flipped through the pages, one photograph caught Walter's eye. It was a picture of a little girl holding a teddy bear, standing next to a woman who looked strikingly familiar. "Who's this?" Walter asked, his voice trembling. "That's me," Emily said with a smile. "And that's my mom, Susan. She passed away when I was 10. Walter's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the woman in the photo. It was Margaret's younger sister, Susan. In that moment, everything clicked. Emily wasn't just a stranger, she was family. Tears filled Walter's eyes as he shared the revelation. "Emily, your mother was my wife's sister. That makes you my niece." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Emily and Mark stared at Walter, overwhelmed by the realization. What had seemed like a random act of kindness was, in fact, a reunion of long-lost family. From that day forward, Walter became a cherished part of Emily and Mark's lives. He spent holidays with them, watched their family grow, and found a renewed sense of purpose in his final years. Though he had sacrificed his savings, Walter gained something far more valuable, a connection to a family he never knew he had. And as he sat with them, surrounded by love and laughter, he knew Margaret would have been proud. In the end, Walter's story wasn't just about generosity, it was about finding light in the most unexpected places. His selflessness had not only saved a life, but it also mended a broken family, leaving a legacy that would be remembered for generations to come. Walter Grant, a humble elderly man living a quiet life, stunned everyone with an extraordinary act of kindness that changed lives forever. When he encountered a dying young woman and her desperate husband, he gave away his entire life savings to fund her life-saving surgery, never expecting anything in return. But what began as a selfless sacrifice soon revealed a shocking truth. This woman wasn't a stranger at all, but someone deeply connected to Walter's past. In a twist no one could foresee, Walter discovered a heartbreaking yet heartwarming link that brought him closer to a family he never knew he had. His final act of compassion became the ultimate testament to the power of love and selflessness.